Hello everyone and welcome to the next video in the vocal analysis series. We are going to be talking about Shinobu today, and once again I feel like this is going to be a shorter video purely because the music portion alone is quite a bit shorter than most of the other videos I've done. There's a couple of reasons for that, and I'll go into those as we move along, but if you want to hear my general thoughts about Ryusei Tai as a group, I'll direct you to the beginning of the Kanata video where I go into that more extensively. When it comes to Shinobu himself, I've heard people say that his voice is a little hard to pin down, and I definitely agree. But I think the biggest thing I've noticed just putting the songs together initially is how consistent he is. Ryusei Tai as a unit doesn't have a lot of songs that you could point at as being technical vocal showcases, so a lot of his obvious vocal progression comes in later songs simply because that's really the first opportunity he has to show off different aspects of his voice. And Shinobu is another one of those characters where I don't really have a vocal comparison because his voice actor doesn't have any other roles I can draw from. So most of what I'm basing my conclusions on here just has to do with his voice in general and what I've heard in the live concerts. Also, side note, if you have never actually seen Shinobu's voice actor, he is about the same height as Shinobu himself, and while this has absolutely nothing to do with his singing, I always find it interesting when a voice actor ends up really resembling their character in one way or another. The closest voice I can compare his to is Nazuna's in terms of his tendency to go into a very sharp, nasalized tone, particularly in the faster songs and when he's singing higher. And sometimes he sounds very much like Nazuna, even down to his vocal inflections and attack, but there's a surprising amount of depth to his voice that comes out at times, and I think that mostly speaks to him more or less using his natural voice when he's singing for Shinobu. There's times when, once again, I think he's likely singing with a raised or a lowered larynx just based on certain tonal differences that come through, but I'll go more into those on the songs where it's relevant. I'd mentioned this briefly in one of the other videos, but Shinobu is actually one of my stealth faves, and I've had one of his quotes on my Twitter profile since 2016, which is, alas, despite appearances, I am an indoor ninja, because it really amused me when I first read that story, and his birthday is actually the day before mine, so I have a lot of affection for him and I'm happy to talk about him more. But I think that's all I've got for an introduction, so let's get into the music. So a lot of these early songs I'm probably going to have a lot of the same comments I had for Kanata in the sense that the members of Ryusei Tai, with the exception of Chiaki, just weren't allowed to sing very much. They have very short solos, barely any duets, and most of the time are just singing in unison, so it's hard to pull much out of what's there. You get a pretty good sense of what I'm going to call his bass or his most neutral tone here, and while he does use vibrato in some of the later songs, a lot of times it's practically non-existent when he's holding notes and he can maintain a very steady pitch for a long time. You also get a little bit of his speaking voice in here, and Shinobu's another one of those characters where I think his singing and speaking voices are fairly similar both in tone and inflection. And Ryusei Tai tends to speak a lot in their songs, so you get to hear them in close proximity pretty often. Once again, not a whole lot to pull from here because any solos he's getting are super short, but you can already hear some of the similarities in terms of singing style that I talked about in Nazuna's video. Particularly his direct frontal attack on notes and very precise way of hitting pitches and then immediately moving to the next note. Admittedly, with the style of these songs, there's not a lot of room to breathe or expand past that, but even compared to the other members of Ryusei Tai, I'd say it's more noticeable with him and he's very good at keeping right on top of the beat. So we finally get to some duets, and I had mentioned in the Kanata video that initially Kanata and Midori tended to sing together, and since Chiaki got most of the longer solo work, that naturally left Shinobu and Tetora, and their voices actually work surprisingly well, even though at first glance it might not seem that way. Yoshking is another one of those voice actors that's putting on a very significant character voice when he sings for Tetora, so it's easy for him to pull it back when singing with someone else, and he's pretty obviously doing that here. But in future songs it doesn't happen so much, and their voices actually end up balancing each other out as a result. Shinobu's voice actually tends to blend pretty well with a lot of other singers, even ones that are similar to his in one way or another, and you'll get to hear more of that as the video goes on. And just like in the Kanata video, this is literally all the solo work that exists in Ryusei Hanabi, but it does get a little bit into something that will be more prevalent as the video goes on, and that's what Shinobu's voice tends to do when he sings low. I've talked about before how sometimes really low pitches can cause a singer's voice to get whispery because it's starting to get out of their natural singing range, but instead of a whisper, Shinobu kind of tends to growl when he gets down there, which is really noticeable in certain songs. He does have a little bit of rasp to his natural tone, or what my mom has always referred to as gravel in singing voices, but it really comes out when he dips low. This, I would say, is the first song where he maintains that somewhat higher tone throughout all of it, and you can hear there's a definite difference from the earlier songs in that the lower parts of his voice are much less prominent. Shinobu is another one of those characters with a very similar head voice and chest voice when he's singing with what I'm going to assume is a raised larynx. And while he never quite hits what I would call a true falsetto in any of these songs, he does go up quite high, and there's very little difference in his tone most of the time. This is also the first time he gets to sing with Midori, and as we talked about in the Kanata video, Midori has probably the most neutral tone in Ryusei Tai, so they're all pretty much going to sound good with him. Growing Starry Days really is the first time Ryusei Tai gets anything you could term close to a ballad, and it makes me wish they get them more often because it allows them to show off a more technical side of their singing. And you can hear the difference in Shinobu's voice right from the start. His attack isn't nearly as sharp, he's not hitting his consonants as hard, and there's even a tiny bit of vibrato starting to creep into the end of his long notes. The last solo is probably the most noteworthy, because this is something Shinobu does from time to time, but he's capable of making his tone extremely clean and taking out almost all of the rasp from his voice when he wants to. Normally that happens when a singer is lowering their larynx, although there's not really anything else about his singing in this song to imply that's the case here, but it's interesting either way. Once again, super short, but a couple of new things to talk about. This is the first time he gets to sing with Chiaki, and even though Shinobu can get surprisingly deep, it's still never going to be as deep as Chiaki normally sings. So there's no issues with them singing together, even when Shinobu's not purposefully trying to keep his tone up. This is also the first time we get anything close to a vocal cry, and it's still not super prevalent, but it's there on the highest note in this line. So there's these little things happening that tell me Shinobu could probably do a lot more vocally if he was allowed to, and they keep popping up throughout the series. He's staying very high here again, and these are the songs where he definitely sounds the most like Nazuna. And honestly, I wish they'd get to sing together for real sometime, because the only song they ever get close is maybe one trio line in the Hamtaro song. There's not much else here, and I realize at this point it might seem like he's singing significantly less than Kanata, but the major reason for that is a lot of times outside of their usual duet partners, Ryusei Tai was divided into the then first years and the then third years. So Chiaki and Kanata would have duets, and the other three would sing as a trio. Normally I don't use any trio portions in these videos because it's much harder to hear individual singers that way, so that's at least part of the reason why there aren't a whole lot of examples for some of these songs. Not much to mention here either, except it's probably more obvious this time when he's singing with Tetra how much Tetra is holding back, because Shinobu's voice is so much more prevalent in the mix. We also get another example of him going up fairly high at the end and his tone remaining exactly the same, but other than that, nothing we haven't heard before. Luckily, he does get a fair bit of content in his featured 5-star song, and while I do kind of wish the theme had been different, mostly because it's very similar to his first solo, there's enough other things going on that I can kind of overlook that. Speaking of, though, one of the things I feel like causes a lot of people to overlook Shinobu as a character is that, like a lot of the original first years, it seems like they just haven't gotten proper focus, and so often the writers fall back on whatever their main trope was at the beginning. One of the things that drew me to OnStar's characters in the first place is that not only do they tend to subvert the most obvious stereotype or archetype that they fall into, but a lot of times their story is about accepting that and growing past it as well. With Shinobu, so often it seems like the writers don't know where to go with him and just default to, well, he likes ninjas. When the entire reason Shinobu likes ninjas is because he was so used to being alone that he tried to form a positive association with it. And viewing ninjas as drawing strength from being solitary shadow warriors helped him navigate those feelings. So I really hope his next feature song is more about him stepping out of those shadows and continuing to grow in terms of confidence with a more unexpected musical style. But that was a very long aside, so speaking of this song, he's staying very low again, and unlike the last one, this time he's mixed under Tetaro when they're singing together. So the music producers are at least starting to play around with their voices more. He's also bringing in more vibrato on some of the long notes, and I think this is overall a good showcase of the consistency I was talking about at the beginning. Because pitch-wise, he covers a pretty wide range, and he's just so solid regardless of what part of his tone he's using. Another song where he's staying fairly high up the entire time, and it's probably the most noticeable during his duet with Chiaki since their voices are much farther apart than the last time they got to sing together. But once again, no issues with how they sound. He's using this really quick vibrato at the end of one note that we haven't really heard before, and this is the part of the video where I once again recommend going to watch the live concerts, because at least for the Starry Symphony videos I've seen, they're recordings of the live viewing, which means minimal audio editing compared to the Blu-ray releases. Of course, these days there's still ways to do on-the-fly pitch correction, but it's pretty raw, and Ryusei Tai generally are really good live. And this note is just as steady in the live as it is on the recording, which is pretty impressive. Also, I feel the need to mention that Midori and Shinobu's voice actors spend about 85% of their time during any live concert walking around holding hands, which is always very cute. But Ryusei Tai is super fun live, and I have a new appreciation for their vocals after watching those shows in particular. It's funny because I was listening back to the Kanata video just to see what I could reference, and at one point I talked about how much Shinobu and Kanata got to sing together in later songs, but this is the first time it happens and we're already 11 songs into the video, so I definitely did not remember that starting up so late. I think part of the reason is that as time went on, the distribution of lines in Ryusei Tai songs became a lot more even, and in this one he gets to sing with everyone except for Tetra, who is technically the featured character, so that's definitely something I've noticed going through all of these in order. So he's definitely starting to sing more with Kanata here, but other than that, we've got a little bit more talking, and the only real thing of note to mention is that there's one line where he's using more dynamics than we've heard before. He's singing very softly here, and it almost brings out this whispery, aspirate quality that his voice doesn't normally have. Ryusei Tai in general is very big and boisterous, so there's not a lot of opportunity to be soft, so I appreciate it happening here. I wish he'd get more solos of this song specifically, since it's one of the rare slower songs that Ryusei Tai gets, but given that it's a Kanata feature, I kind of understand why he doesn't. I do hope that his next feature 5-star has a song that at least has a few ballad elements so he gets to show off that part of his voice more. But this time, even though he's keeping his voice higher again, you still get a sense of how well supported his held notes are, and that even though he's very good with fast songs, he can adapt to the slower, more flowy rhythm as well. This one is mostly duets aside from one solo at the beginning, but he does get to sing with everyone else, and it's a good showcase of the progression that the mixing for Ryusei Tai has gone through. Because we've moved from barely any duets in the beginning to safe duet partners in the middle of their discography to now all of them being able to sing with each other at a mostly equal level, and without the mix trying to hide or compensate for their voices. Even strong character voices like Kanata and Tetra aren't being toned down anymore, and you can clearly hear both voices in all of the duets now. Another song where he gets to sing with pretty much everyone and is mixed pretty evenly with everyone. And while his solo parts are fairly short, the last one is the one I want to talk a bit more about. Since this is one of the few times we get to hear a dynamic change within the actual vocal line where he pushes the last note into a crescendo. We've heard him start lines at different dynamic levels and maintain that, but this is really the first time there's a significant shift, and again, it's showing me that there's probably a lot more he could do if given the opportunity. As usual with these cross-unit songs, he gets 2 duets with members of his own unit, but he also gets to sing with 2 members of Knights. He'll get to sing more with Tsukasa in the shuffle unit, but here he's actually the one pulling back, and you can hear Tsukasa's voice a little more forward in the mix. I don't think it would sound bad if they were both pushing that really nasalized part of their voices, but the trend seems to be if 2 singers have that, they try and pull it back in at least one of them. Arashi is interesting because Shinobu's still singing closer to neutral, so their voices are very smooth together, and it's not really a sound we've gotten from him in duets before. And he actually gets one of the more significant solos, which is nice. Again, please go watch this live because, like I mentioned in the Izumi video, it's so much fun and everyone sounds great. I actually find it hard to believe this is the first time I've ever talked about this shuffle song because some of the others I've covered multiple times already, but just based on the characters I've done so far, I've never actually gotten to this one. Stylistically, this song doesn't really allow him to showcase anything different vocally because it goes back to the mostly very short, fast solos that we've heard a lot of already. He does get to sing with both Wataru and Hinata, but it's so short that it's really hard to tell what their voices would sound like during a longer duet, although it does seem as though Wataru is not holding back at all. This one, however, was really the kind of song I've been waiting for him to get. It's got this moodiness to it that Ryuseitai never really dips into, and the song content is definitely not in line with any sort of hero motif. So Shinobu gets to do so much that he's never had the chance to before. He gets to sing far more with Tsukasa here than he does in Seishun Emergency, and this time I'd say they're both shifting closer to neutral with their voices, but it works really well, and Tomoya has a very even tone to begin with, so Shinobu sounds fine with him. In terms of solo work, however, he finally gets to use proper vibrato. He gets to go up into what's probably the best example of a true head voice that we've heard. And while again it's hard to tell if he's deliberately lowering his larynx, this is definitely not a tone we've heard him use before. So there's a lot of really good technical vocal work that makes me want more of what he's able to showcase in this song. This song is mostly for fun, and he's up using that higher tone again. And admittedly, there's a few solo lines I couldn't really pull because Maoi's doing whatever he's doing in the background. But when they get to the chorus, Maoi and Shinobu sound really, really good together because they have very different voices, so they can both come through with a lot of strength in the mix. Shinobu does tend to sound the best with deeper voices, I think, because he doesn't have to pull back at all, and this is a good example of that. I realized that this is not the right card to be using as a visual, but when I was making the graphics, the wiki didn't have the renders for the actual cards yet, so I went with another Animal Ear outfit since I didn't cover the Hamtaro song, and it was the closest one that exists. But there's so many people in this song that no individual singer is going to get a lot, although he does get one kind of pseudo-rap line that's different from anything he's done before. I've talked about how Shinobu has a very clean attack on notes, which means he can handle very fast sections with very clear enunciation, and this is a good example of that. And the other interesting thing is that, at least among this group of singers, he actually has one of the deeper voices. So when he's singing with Aira, he gets to be the lower support, and that's not a role he's had to fill very often. So I compared this solo to his first feature 5-star song earlier, but honestly, for a first solo, I like it a lot, and it's a good representation of his character. I'm very happy that they let him stay low for pretty much the entire song, because that, to me, is still the most interesting part of his voice, and he gets super growly in the pre-chorus. And is able to hit that very clean tone coming into the bridge. That just doesn't come through nearly as strong when he's singing with a higher larynx. But considering this is from 2018 or so, it does prove that he was already capable of doing all of these things, but having an actual song to himself was the first time he really got to show them off. I really do like both of Shinobu's solos. They're very different from each other, but both very catchy, and he's still staying pretty down in his tone. There's one section that gets very fast with very rapid rhythm singing, and he's got no problems getting through it. But during the sections where the instrumentals get quiet, you can hear how much depth his voice is capable of. And it's really nice when he's able to utilize it for more than a couple of seconds at a time. So yes, I think both of Shinobu's solos are really great, and while I still am pushing for him to get a ballad, I'm not at all unhappy with what we've gotten so far. And that brings us to the end. I did things a little differently this time because quite honestly, the biggest time sink with making these videos is doing live commentary and then having to edit it down. So I actually scripted this one. It's still live in the sense that I'm writing as I listen, but it makes the editing process a lot smoother. So if I sound different, that's probably why, but hopefully it still sounds okay. That being said, this was fun to do, and while my biggest takeaway is that I just need more when it comes to Shinobu, I hope this at least highlights a little of what his voice is capable of, and I really hope in the future he'll get to show off even more because I'm fairly convinced that we haven't heard everything he can do just yet. I had already mentioned that I'm going to do Yuzuru and Mao next, and I actually have pretty much the next member of every 4-person unit planned out that I intend to do, although I won't spoil the order of that just yet. As always, I hope you enjoyed, and please like, comment, do all the things the algorithm wants you to do, and I will see you next time.